I'll go ahead and start. Thanks for showing up for our talk this afternoon, this morning. I'm Cristina. I'm from the University of California, Berkeley, and I direct a research center there. It's the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces. And what I'm going to present today is a model of how to approach the development of healthy workplaces from an interdisciplinary and comprehensive point of view. Okay, so are all of you interested in workplaces, how people are working? Okay, great. So this quote won't surprise you, that the results of what we build and what we create in organizations will either make people sick or happy depending on how they're treated at work. So that's sort of a primary thought here, and I want to go ahead and kind of expand on that. So when we talk about well-being, I'm being pretty comprehensive in the concept that it's both psychological, social, and physical in nature. And we have to consider all of those together in order to establish well-being in our workplaces. Okay, so I'm going to make some propositions. And these are pretty bold propositions. And the reason why I say it's bold, because when you get a group of people together and you talk about how to create healthy workplaces, somebody inevitably raises their hand and says, work isn't supposed to be fun. Or if you make work fun, if you make the situation too comfortable, people won't work hard. So this is actually flying in the face of those assumptions. And so we are going to make the proposition that we can make the work experience very positive, in fact, resulting in joy, pride, meaning, satisfaction, and well-being. And we can help employees at the same time become healthier and happier with their lives at work. Anybody want that? Yeah, okay, that's why you're here and not at other talks. In order to do that, we really have to reinvent the workplace. We can't just tweak it, we really have to reinvent it. There's a lot of things that have to change. All right, so the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces was created in order to address the problem of the declining health of people in the population and how sick we are. And there are 3 different strategies for how to deal with that. One is to get more health care to people. The second is to make health care more affordable. The third is to make them healthier. And so we decided to take the healthier route. As a center, we have 3 roles. One is the repository, which is a repository of knowledge across all relevant disciplines, where there is science about how to promote the health and well-being of employees. We're also a convener, which means that we bring people together, both experts and the public, to learn about all the science that's available and how to use that science for making change in organizations. And then we're also providing this role as a catalyst for change, which means we are conducting research studies that follow from our model, which really take a very different perspective on this problem. And we also want to disseminate information publicly without cost so that everybody has the benefit of this information. So as you can see, there are a lot of circles around the center, and what we're proposing is that all of these different subjects have a role in designing healthy workplaces. So as you can see, it's not just changing the work, like the hours of work, telecommuting, that sort of thing, or the mind and body, just taking care of people better medically and playing upon neuroscience to invent better work arrangements. You know, we are taking all of these different areas into account. And of course, I'm going to be emphasizing this bubble right here because it's actually the built environment that I think, from my studies, is really the foundation from which a lot of good can be built. And so you can't get around the spaces that people are in and how it affects them. So let's start at least with building spaces that actually make people feel good. I'm going to be elaborating this in a minute. So, you know, what does the scientific evidence say about what promotes health and well-being in physical spaces? So these are probably familiar to you, right? Anybody, anything new? Do you know about biophilia? Anybody know about biophilia? That's the one thing that a lot of people in the built environment don't really know much about, and that's bringing nature and natural elements into the workplace. So the easy thing to think of is plants, bringing green plants into the workplace. But it's much more than that. It has to do with patterns, nature patterns brought in. It also has to do with projection of nature scenes. It actually has a positive effect when you actually introduce wood, natural wood. It can even be laminate. What matters is the pattern and the grain. So these are demonstrated effects that promote health and well-being. All of these things do. Okay, so in terms of these factors, who doesn't know about these elements? Occupants. So when you talk to occupants about what would you like to have in your workplace, they don't know to ask for these things, which will actually promote their health and well-being. Who else doesn't know is designers and also architects. So sorry, I'm overgeneralizing. None of you in here would qualify here. But the point is, the people who are responsible for doing the designing, writing the blueprints, and designing the internal spaces, they don't know a lot about this information. And so actually, the talk that I'm giving is not about it's not about the architecture of the buildings. You know, how should we build buildings? It's really about what effect do we want to have from people in those buildings. And the implication is, then how do we build it so people will have those effects, will have that experience? And so obviously the experience that I'm driving towards is health and well-being. All right, so this literature that is already out there in terms of the built environment has demonstrated that you can get these kinds of outcomes from designing it using these elements. Now, organizations would die to have these kinds of results, right? Because these are the elements of organizational success. And it's very important to not only the people who own these companies and run these companies, but it's also important to the people working in these companies. You know, they want to have the sense of accomplishment, competence, satisfaction, and so on, because they want to come to work and do their best work when they're there. A lot of things frustrate them so that they can't actually do that. So here we have a lot of literature that says, here are the features you want to build into your organization in the built environment that have positive effects on people's health and well-being. Here are the outcomes that you get when you build those into the organization. You know, why don't we have that? Why don't we do that? And probably the simple answer is, it's not believed. So when you talk to CFOs and you talk to COOs and so on, you know, their concern is, if you change the way we operate this business, something bad is going to happen. So a risk is attached to, you want to do what with that space, and more important, it's going to cost what. And so there are lots of barriers to acceptance of this kind of notion of how you want to build these spaces. And so we want to change that situation. So we have spent the last 4 years studying the literature across all these relevant areas and tried to figure out what unifies the positive results that come from all of this literature. And you might think, how can you knit together the apples and oranges of the built environment and human nature and medicine and all those things? Well, actually, the common thread is not so difficult to understand, and it certainly isn't a surprise. And that is, what's common is that it all reduces down to satisfying basic human needs. So the secret to health and well-being is actually satisfaction of basic human needs. And some of those aspects are they protect the employee from harm, they stimulate the employee's senses in ways that enhance cognitive functioning, they embed the employee in a space that is comfortable and ancestrally familiar, that's the biophilia aspect, and they activate the physiological systems that support immunization, restoration, and body repair. It really does. Okay, so if that's the common thread, then let's think about this for a minute and figure out what's the significance of that. How can we use it? So the person is the center of the universe. The person determines what experience he or she will have in that environment. So we've got to get back to the person. So the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because a lot of the literature that's on, promoting health and well-being is interventions, and then let's see what happens. It'll either have a positive effect or it doesn't. But what it doesn't consider is what happens when people are in that intervention or affected by that intervention. What is that experience to the person? And once that is experienced by the person, what is the result of that experience in terms of behavior and in terms of ultimately their health and well-being? So we need to know what produces a positive response in people and why. And so the scientific literature suggests the why is because you can satisfy their basic needs. Okay, so we then created a model to try to capture all that we've learned across these different literatures. And the first thing I'm going to explain about the model is that we have an organizational context, which is the building, the business, the occupation, its history, and maybe more important, the cash flow. What kind of resources are available in order to make those investments. So that's the first context that we have to think about. The second is the organizational supports. In other words, what has the organization created that actually supports effective performance in the organization and promotes the health and well-being of people in that organization. This is where the interventions happen, okay? So interventions can be of these three types. Preventing something bad from happening, so we're familiar with occupational safety and health, regulations, trainings, and so on in order to prevent injury and illness. But it's also mitigation, which means there are ways that we need to mitigate hazards that exist that we want to minimize the bad effects from. And then finally, promotion, which is promotion of health and well-being. What are the kinds of things that will actually promote their health, which means affecting their physiology, which means affecting their immune system, which means affecting their mental health. Okay, next Next circle is individual behavior change. These are choices that individuals make about their lifestyle and their work style. So separate from what the organization provides, people make decisions about how they're going to work, how long they're going to work, how much stress they're going to bring onto themselves, whether they're going to eat healthy food, how much coffee they're going to drink, how many energy drinks they're going to drink that day, and so on. These are all contexts that affect the person in the workplace. Do you guys agree? Yeah? Okay. And if you accept the premise that all of these contexts affects the person, then what we're most concerned about is how does it affect the person's physical and psychological state. Now, what are we talking about state? It is the state of need satisfaction. What is their current feeling of satisfaction on a variety of needs that are important to them? Okay, so what we want to know is how do all these different contexts affect those physical and psychological states? What are the connections? Because if we know that, then we know what to change in order to have a positive effect. Okay, so if you actually end up with positive physical and psychological states, you actually get healthier employees because it works for them. It's, there's no, I'm going to just say there's a mind-body connection. Some people think we're all severed at the neck, and the only thing that matters is the brain, but the body is highly involved in responses to the environments. And if we can involve the whole person in the environment in a positive way, we actually get better health. We also get better organizational outcomes. Personally, satisfaction, and also organizational effectiveness. And we also get sustainability. Now, I have to detract for a second and talk about why this doesn't work in organizations today. And that's because the lack of health in employees is invisible to decision makers. And that's because you have a workforce that is there every day, and all people who are C-suites come in and see are people working. They don't see all the invisibles or all the people who had to leave the workplace because they're sick, depressed, hurt, and so on. And so if we had a sense of determining what is the collateral damage that is happening in our organizations because of creating unhealthy environments, we would have more of a sense of urgency here. Okay, so what's the scientific basis for worrying about basic human needs? There's a lot, okay? Each one of these studies, these are just a sampling of studies that show the connection between satisfaction of human needs and health and well-being. So that connection is clearly there. And it also connects various aspects of the physical environment to well-being through the satisfaction of human needs. It's there. It's already there. We're just pulling it together. What are these needs? Okay? So combing the literature, we have determined that there are 8 psychological needs and there's 1 physical need. It may be different. With more research, we may find they're 10, or they're 11, or they're 15. It doesn't matter. We just need to get to what really counts. And so at the center of this is positive emotions. There's a lot of literature talking about the health relatedness of positive emotions. And these are the joy, pride, inspiration, awe, love, and so on. These wonderful emotions that we actually have a strong need to experience. And when we do, it actually improves our immune system. It actually makes us healthier. It makes us more resilient to hazards, to stress, to downturns, and it also boosts the endocrine system in a way that improves our immune system. All these other aspects have been shown from the literature to be very important for health and well-being. Okay, now here's the problem. We can't go from, okay, we want to satisfy people's need for autonomy. What do we build? Okay, and this is your question, Richard, all the time, which is, so what do we do with this? Okay, so what we did was we thought through what are the kinds of things that drive towards need satisfaction. So what are the features in the environment that would actually drive need satisfaction of a specific need? So we came up with these 7. And so I will go through each of these 7 and how they're connected with those basic needs. So you'll see how useful it is. So privacy. We know privacy is really important. You know it from your own personal experience, but you also hear complaints about not having privacy. It is most connected with autonomy and safety. Does that make sense? Okay, so you can get at those 2 through privacy. Okay, flexibility is the next one. You know, what we're talking about when we talk about flexibility is really a plug-and-play experience that people can go work anywhere and they will be effective. It means a building that is fully wired, it's got internet, infallible internet connection, people can find you, you can find people, you can go anywhere, and you're just as effective in one microenvironment as another. That's predictability. And obviously the other part is you can walk into a space and, well, I'll just leave it there. That it's, you can just work and do your best work. Why don't we create environments like that? And so that's essential for competence and mastery, a feeling of competence, and also accomplishment. All right, try this again. Predictability. Okay, predictability is that no matter where you go, you can anticipate what's going to happen. A person has the resources in a workspace that enable a reliable and consistent workplace to match needs. So predictability, allowing safety, in other words, you're free from harm, competence mastery, and also autonomy, which means that you are not dependent on others, that you can go do your work with confidence that you'll be able to do it well. And here's one that seems important to people, equity. There's as much functional value as there is symbolic value with that built space in projecting equity. So it plugs into a sense of meaning and purpose, positive emotions, and belonging and social connection. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a stress. It's kind of, when you give people the assignment, go design for equity, they really have to think through what it looks like. But it can be done. Yeah?
Go that one a little further, like what
Sure.
would be an example of an building that is good for equity? More
Think about the symbolic nature of equity, which is we're all respected. So it might be that it's more of an egalitarian design. Everybody's, in the same space.
Not the CEO in the best place in the world.
Right, but it could also be projection of communications so that everybody hears what's going on all at the same time. Okay? Okay, comfort. We know comfort is really important, physical as well as psychological comfort. And so obviously physically, we want to have that sense of vitality, also safety and positive emotions. And connection, this ties directly to people wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves, being part of a social group, which plays into positive emotions, belonging and social connection, but also personal growth, learning from others, okay, and learning how to be competent with others. And then finally, safety. Safety is really key. Free from harassment, free from harm, psychological safety as well. No matter where you are, you're not going to be harmed in any way. So autonomy, safety, and vitality. Okay, those are the 7. Now I have to tell you how to translate this, okay? Because as an integrated approach, we really have to think about how the whole organization works together. And so this is our vision, which is these are all functional areas of an organization. And each of those functional areas makes decisions about how they're going to spend the money and what they're going to do. What are their goals going to be and what impact do they want to have? Well, what if each of these functional areas makes decisions on the basis of what will promote health and well-being? So instead of the arrows going in affecting people, the arrows go out and people's health and well-being affects what decisions are made in each of those different groups. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So let's figure out how you actually do that in a practical manner. Very busy slide. Thank you. I will take it really fast, which is to say you have to have an assessment tool to evaluate the extent to which those features are present in each of those environments, in each of those functional areas. Based on that, you can identify some hotspots. What are the areas in which need satisfaction is lower than desired, and so what kinds of things need to be addressed? Given the hotspots, here's the key. What should we change? So we are going to be building inventories of options for change to address those hotspots, okay? And they will be connected to each of those functional areas. We're in the process of building these inventories now, but we're working with School of Public Health, which is building a new building, and they already have problems with the schematic design and the internal design. We've identified some hotspots. Now we're building inventory of options. These options can be from no cost to high cost. And depending on what the preferences are and the cost tolerance, you might choose certain things. So these are examples of interventions that can be chosen that tie back to need satisfaction. So I've got some other slides to show how it all works. So my conclusion here, the whole premise that I'm presenting here is that there is an engine of happiness and productivity and health and well-being, and it's about satisfying what needs matter most, what they need most. So if we have, assessments that allow us to identify what needs are most important to individuals and to whole groups and maybe the whole organization, we can develop an infrastructure of interventions that actually work, that would be most relevant to that organization, regardless of occupation, regardless of level, regardless of industry. It can be done. But we don't have the assessment tool, we don't have the inventories done yet, and I invite you to work with us, if this intrigues you, to help us build all of that out. Okay, and that is it. Thank you.